Welcome to Red and April Off-Grid. We have been sharing our off-grid home build. This video is a little longer than usual, so we'll get right to it. Here's Red.
After finishing up the first end wall, we decided to move to the opposite end of the house and start on the other end wall. It's a little easier since it's all the same color of sheet metal that we're putting on these sides, and we kind of knew what we were doing with the slope and everything, so we decided to keep that process going and move to the other side. So these end walls, I have to cut the slope on top to follow the pitch of the roof, and then also fit it in around those little boards that stick out for the eaves. So there's quite a bit of detail work along, that one end of every single board that I put on, even the ones that don't have windows. Fortunately, this wall only has one window and this little vent hole, so it should go faster. There's not quite as much detail work. The windows really take a lot of time. We actually bought 3 different lengths of this particular color of metal for different places on the house, just to minimize waste. Earlier I had brought over the wrong length of piece, that's why you saw us taking it back and getting the right size there. This next piece, of course, I'm dry fitting, kind of got the top done, and now we're trying to figure out what to do for that little vent hole. So that's a 4-inch vent hole for the bathroom ventilation fan. And here's the cover that I bought for it, and it doesn't seem to be right. The flapper won't close, and it's not the right angle, and so I'm just trying to figure out, scratching my head. What I found out was that this was made for a roof, and it needs a pitch in order to work properly, so I bought the wrong one. I need to get one that's actually made to mount on the wall, and so I'm going to have to order a different one. But we decided to go ahead and go with the hole, go ahead and put the hole in it anyway, so that it would be ready whenever we get the proper ventilation cover. Which this was a little challenging. None of the power tools that I had wanted to work very good for this. The nibbler doesn't like it. It doesn't like to turn. And so anyway, it was a hand tool thing, and that worked out okay. It was a little challenging, but we got the hole cut in and got this one in place. I did cut out the hole for the vent line a little big. I think it was 4.5 inches just to give some clearance for that pipe to go through. Well, it's the next day and we're back at it. This piece was a nice easy piece. We're getting ready to put it on, and I'm siliconing the seam here. This piece I just had to cut up top. There was nothing kind of in the middle, so you really enjoy these pieces that are a little easier to put on. There's actually not too many of them. So anyway, this was a nice easy piece, getting it fit in place. Putting the screws in here, like I say, I put these kind of every 4 foot up on the wall. And I made sure that there was a board, behind every 2 feet actually, but I'm only screwing in every 4 feet and trying to keep a reasonably straight line there where those screws go in. Moving on to the window here, and I might mention that this wall only has one window along the entire expanse, and we did that on purpose because this is the west side, and so when the sun sets here, the evening sun hits the western wall and really bakes that side of the house kind of in the afternoon and in the evening. And so we wanted to have as few openings in that wall as possible, so we got as little heat transfer as possible. So this window is the window in the guest bedroom. We wanted to have one window that looked out kind of that side of the house, so we made it kind of small, and the other window in that guest bedroom is around the corner there. It's a bigger window. It opens, so you could get out if you needed to. So this is just a small viewing window to kind of minimize that heat transfer on this side of the wall. We would also like to plant some shade trees on this side of the wall to provide shade in the evening. We have a few mesquite trees that aren't too far away. They're just kind of out of the camera shot here, but they're not real tall, and they only provide shade when the sun is really low. So if we could get some nice big tree, maybe something more like a cottonwood or something that would really give some shade kind of as that sun is starting to set kind of in the afternoon. This window did end up giving me a little trouble with the J-trim, that top piece that I kind of put on last here. And the reason is those ridges, normally if you were like planning all this out in advance, so that the window would fall where there's not a ridge directly in line with the side. Because when there's a ridge there, it just makes it hard to put that top J-trim piece in. You can't like put it in, slide it up, and then slide it down over the material in order to get that good seal. So what I had to do here was actually cut that top seam along the top a little lower on the side with the ridge so that it contacted the side of the window evenly and a little higher on the other side. Next, we decided to move on to the north side of the house, which is the shorter end of the house and has those beams that stick out, and you can see the eye shape of the beams because they're 2 kind of C shapes back to back. And so this presented a challenge because how do you get the metal, inside that eye part, of the beam? And so we really didn't know what we were going to do coming into it, but we decided that I could make a little pattern and we could cut out a little piece of metal and put it inside there on either side, and then put the main piece kind of over that and make sure that they overlap, and that way we could get a really tight seal. So here I am making my template. And to make that template, I just decided to use just a piece of OSB that I had laying around and take some time. And I like templates because you can take some time and make sure that they fit good, get them cut to size, and then just use them as a pattern to trace onto the metal over and over again. I had to do several test fits to get it to fit properly. It's a bit of a challenging shape, so I'd go up and test it, then go back to the shop and sand on it for a while. So eventually I got it to fit after several tries, but I think this might work pretty well. Some final adjustments with my pocket knife to make it fit just right, and got it as close as possible. I think I'm ready to go ahead and try to make some tabs here. At first I thought about just making a bunch of these tabs to fit, but then I realized that the ridge will be, hitting at different places as I go across the roof, and I want these to kind of blend seamlessly. And so some of them will, kind of be on the flat part of the metal, and some of them will have all or part of a ridge in them. So I'm going to have to make these kind of custom for each fit. So with this template, I was able to just kind of put it wherever I needed to as far as the ridge to get more or less of that ridge in the piece. And then use my nibbler here to kind of rough cut it out, cut away some of the excess material. And then of course the finishing had to be done by hand. We also had to do a dry fit with each piece to kind of see exactly where that ridge was going to fall and get an idea of exactly, where I needed to cut out my little tab that I'll fit up in there. Once I figured out where to put it, I traced it out. Here I am using my nibbler to cut off some of the excess material, make kind of the long straight cuts. It works really good for that. But then the small detail work, I just had to go in with a pair of snips. This nibbler is a great tool for these straight cuts. It makes a real nice, clean looking cut, which I really appreciate about it. And I can, as you can see, it's mostly kind of straight, so I can get both ends and both sides done. So basically all four sides. And so then all that leaves, to do with the hand snippers is those corners. So that worked out really well. Here I am with the snips kind of rounding things off, going in and cutting a little notch to get around that little bend where the kind of the italicized I comes up there. And then leaving a tab on the back, those little tabs that stick out on the back, I will use to kind of be somewhere that I can staple that piece onto the board with. These little tabs definitely took some extra time and slowed down the process, but they were totally worth it. They actually look really nice. They have to be put on before. You can see me fitting it in, then I'll staple it in before we put the sheet up. But they really made a nice tight seal and looked really clean, and so they were totally worth the time. Well, we have the first four pieces up on this side, and we decided to go back and put on the trim piece since we've got that corner finished. There's a lot of detail up in the roof line, just all kinds of boards and places that we have to move around that beam on the side and stuff. And so here I am kind of peeling it back and doing some of the detail cuts along the top and just trying to fit it in real close. Ended up being kind of complicated, but it was a nice fit, and it fit up in there kind of around all of the beams and all of the eaves, and so I ended up being real happy with it. It looked nice. It's also a nice piece of metal. It's got a folded seam on the side, which gives it a lot of rigidity and makes it to where you have to put in less screws along the side to keep it from kind of bowing out. And so I was able to attach this with a minimum of screws, and I think it looked like a nice seal. Well, it's getting late in the day, but we decided to go ahead and try to put in the bathroom window here in an attempt to kind of get it ready to start putting the metal on and start working our way back to the other side. Well, it's the next morning and we're putting up the sheet metal around that window. Definitely a lot of detail work on this side. It definitely takes some time to cut in around the beams and especially around this window. Cut in around the window too. There's just a lot of cuts and you got to check everything 3 or 4 times to make sure you got it right. Like I say, I didn't order any extra material, so I'm pretty paranoid and taking it slow and just trying to really make sure that I don't mess it up because I don't have any second chances here. Cutting out the second piece of the window here, putting that in, and then I just take a little bit of time to put in that J-trim along the top. This one went in fairly easy. It was a little bit longer window, and I'm kind of getting the hang of it, how to cut those ends so that the J-piece goes in a little better. So this one actually went in the best so far. Went in pretty easy, and then just kind of screw it down and finish up that piece. So I'll tell you a little bit about the design for the long walls of this house. So they're, the 2 long walls are 50 foot long, and we wanted to break them up and do something just a little more interesting so it's not all just, the same color sheet metal all the way. And so we decided to use actually 3 different colors of sheet metal and 2 different styles on this long wall with some trim just to kind of break it up. So in order to do that, we're doing 4 pieces of that kind of blue-gray that we've been doing in from each side, and then the center is where we're going to switch it up. So that's why we're doing the 4 pieces on each end first and not going just straight across here. Working on the 3rd piece now. We got these last 2 pieces for this color section will be a little easier. Still have to fit them in around the top, but it's so nice when you don't have a window, I got to tell you. And so we're putting this on, kind of making sure it's level and getting it all placed in. When we're fitting them in, we always kind of fit them in from the bottom to the top, slide them in. It's because we're sliding them in up into that J-trim, which I have kind of all along the top and under the beams as well. Here we are hand cutting some more of these tabs. Like I say, each one of these is a little different. You can see the ridge is kind of right in the middle of this one. So just kind of doing the hand detail work. I'd always usually have a test fit or two also just to make sure it fits properly and get it as tight as possible. Like I say, I really like the clean look with these tabs in it. It's worth the extra effort, but it really is kind of slowing down the process. But so I kind of fit them, I get up there, make sure they fit good, and then I staple them in, and then we also have to put silicone on them too before we put the main piece up. So we silicone the main seam along the previous piece, and then silicone the tabs as well, just so we get a nice tight seal. And here's a close-up of us fitting this piece in. You can see how we kind of have to fit it in with both of those pieces of J-trim, the one under the beam and above the beam. So it's a little tricky there, trying not to get silicone everywhere as we fit that in. But once it's in, then we just start putting in some screws, kind of start at the bottom, get a few in the middle, and then kind of work our way up top. Usually I can get them started just by pressing on the metal pretty hard. But the ones at the top are a little more difficult to get started. You can see here I can just kind of put my body weight into it, and the screws pierce pretty well. So most of the time it goes pretty good. So I'm only putting 3 rows of screws here, so the screws aren't not to stand out too much. Here I am at the top, and at the top it's hard to get my body weight into it, so I use a hammer to dimple wherever I'm going to put my screw in, and that works really well. If you just kind of punch it with the hammer, it dimples it, and then they go in really easy. And so that works really good, especially up top where I'm kind of on a ladder, a little precarious, and I don't have much leverage. We're ready to move on to the corner trim for this side, but this piece was pretty badly bent up, and so I had quite a bit of repair work to do before we could use this piece. I started out with a pair of pliers and kind of used a plastic bag so the pliers didn't mar the material too badly. I always leave that plastic coating on too for this process. And then once I got it just bent out as well as I could with pliers, I got the hammer and just started working it with the piece of wood behind it in order to kind of shape it, move that around and kind of hit it from different angles. And it's, actually coming along pretty nicely. You will be able to tell, if you look at it closely later on that there's a bend there, but it's pretty good. How does that look? Here's the countertop, right up, there's your counter coming out, right where this is. So if I have it centered, does it look all right?
Yeah.
All right, so I'm going to center it there, and then the height is the next question. Well, it's the next morning, and I'm working on framing in a spot for the evaporative cooler to go in. And so to do that, we found the location, and then I'm just making a wooden frame that I will attach to the wall. I'm going to actually have to cut out a section of stud and then kind of mount this to the wood framing on the inside. I guess I might mention here, you can see as I'm working on this that I'm kind of covered in dirt on my back, and it's because I fell off the ladder this morning. So this is something I've been really careful about, generally speaking, working at heights, because I know that, the ladder is like the most common workplace injury. It's a really good way to hurt yourself seriously, and so I try to be pretty careful. But this morning, I was just working a couple steps up on the ladder. I wasn't very high. And so I guess that's why I wasn't maybe taking the time I should have to make sure that all 4 feet of the ladder were really stable. So I was just stopped putting that corner piece on, and then all of a sudden I was falling. Yeah, it's a really weird experience, I kind of realized it was happening about midway down, where I started thinking about wondering if I was going to fall on something. Fortunately, I didn't fall on anything. I just, hit the ground, no obstructions, hit the dirt with my back, and I was okay, but it's definitely scary and definitely a good wake-up call to be super careful in the future. Now that I have the opening for that evaporative cooler all boxed in and ready to go, we're ready to move back to the sheeting. So you can see I've got both ends finished. We bought 4 pieces on each side, and now we're ready to do the center section, which will be different. So we wanted to put a different color of metal on top, and on the bottom we're putting a different color and texture of metal. So the first order of business was that bottom piece, and so we had to put another piece of furring along, so I've got a double furring strip at the right height that we wanted. And then April and I snapped a chalk line, so I have a good straight seam going across there, and it was about 2 feet is how tall we're doing this bottom metal. And so for this bottom metal, we decided to go with a nice corrugated tin-looking metal. It's actually Galvalume is the metal that Mueller makes in it. So it looks like corrugated tin. This is actually really nice stuff. It's super heavy duty, and it's got really deep grooves in it. I really like this material, really like the look. It actually has kind of a hammered metal look, which goes really nice with the hammered metal paint that we use to paint the beams. These pieces are going on really fast. They actually don't cover quite as much width. They only cover 32 inches wide, so they're a little bit different width, but that works out fine. They're going on quick, and I'm trying to put the screws. I put the first few screws along top a little lower, but that'll be covered by the evaporative cooler. Then we figured out we need to put them higher so that they're covered by the next piece of trim that goes on. So the screws along the top strip here, or the top of this strip, I'm putting, right up close to the top so that that next piece of Z trim that we put will cover them up. You can see here that white strip that kind of makes the transition between the blue-gray and the Galvalume. So that white piece of trim, I hadn't really figured out originally what I was going to do there, and I ended up not ordering the material for it. And so we decided that a piece of Z trim is what we needed to make that transition. We wanted that piece of white trim so that the transition really popped and was, the eye didn't, it really catches the eye properly. We just wanted a little contrast there. So we went down to Home Depot, found the right piece of trim, and actually painted it. It was a piece of galvanized metal that was made to be painted. Didn't know they made that stuff, but they do. Anyway, we bought some of that, painted it white, and it worked really well. And so we have that nice kind of contrast as it's switching colors, and I think it's more visually appealing to the eye. This stuff is going up really fast and easy. It's very satisfying. The next thing that we're going to do is put up the Z trim. So this is a white piece of trim that I did order originally, and it's from Mueller. It's nice trim, and it's the shape of a Z, so it goes over this piece and it'll go under the next piece. So that when the water flows down, it'll hit this trim and then be forced to go out over this metal as well and on down to the bottom. So we just cut this to length, kind of fit it in to go underneath the J trim by the door there, and then staple it into that piece of extra furring that I put on there. Well, we finished that up quick, and we're ready to go to the next piece, which is actually going to be the same pattern of metal, so the same profile as the blue-gray stuff that we've been using, but this is going to be a dark gray charcoal color. In fact, I think that's what it's called, is charcoal gray. So here I am bringing it over. It's a little windy. It's fighting me a little bit. I'm bringing it over, and we're about to start cutting it out. So this piece will have to be cut out to go around the evaporative cooler opening and the beams up top, and it'll come down to that J trim. You can see April there, so she's putting a piece of masking tape on it to protect the J trim so that while we're doing the dry fitting like we are here, we don't scratch up that white trim. Here we are dry fitting this piece, just put it up there, and then I went inside and kind of traced out with a pencil around that hole. And now I'm trying to cut that out. So the easiest way I could find, and may not be the best way, but I just got a kind of a hole saw that's made for sheet metal and cut in a round hole at all the corners, big enough for the head of my nibbler to go through. And then I was able to get my nibbler in and just cut those straight cuts in all 4 directions. And then just kind of finish it up with a little hand snip work. All right, so we did that, did a dry fit to make sure it fit good, and it does, so we're putting that in place. The J trim work for this, or kind of the finish work, is something that I can do, after the fact. So I was able to just put the piece on and then do the J trim after, and then kind of get that all screwed and sealed into place. You can see April kind of going along doing some fine sealing work with some silicone and some tape to make sure it's all sealed up nice around those beams up top. Next up was sheeting around that kitchen window, and you can see here I'm having to open up that opening a little bit. I'd gone through with my router and opened it up, but it still wasn't big enough. So a little handwork there, and I was able to get the sufficient clearance to put it in. So it's kind of getting late here in the evening, but we're putting that window in and getting ready for the next day. Well, it's the next day and we're back at it, now fitting in around the window. So as you can see here, you can kind of see the gray up against the blue-green, and we like the contrast. It wasn't as much contrast as we'd originally planned. You know, we'd originally planned to go with a real light gray and then the dark gray. So it would have been more of a contrasting color, or it would have been a higher contrast, but we actually like the color instead of that. You still get some contrast, and the color is really nice. That blue-gray color kind of blends in with the landscape here, the color of the mountains in the evening and stuff, and looks really nice. So we are, I think, overall happy that the color went the way it did. Definitely kind of getting the hang of doing these pieces and going around the windows. The more we do, it's definitely, you know, kind of a skill that you learn. The more we do, the better we get at it. Here I am kind of doing the fine details to kind of get ready for that J trim that goes along the top. I've learned how to kind of tweak on that and get it to where that J trim piece along the top of the window goes in a lot easier. Just kind of get it in, put it in loose with just a few screws, and then fit that J trim in along the top. I think this one went in pretty well. Actually, the longer the window, the easier it is to get this stuff in. So this one went in really good, fit really nice and tight, and then I was able to just go back and button it up by putting in the rest of the screws. I mentioned here that as I go along, I do occasionally hit one of those washers that holds the flashing on or the strapping on. But fortunately, so far, I haven't like hit square in the middle. It's always been kind of on the side, and I was able to just kind of cheat by, you know, bringing it back out and then turning the screw a little bit sideways and getting around the washer. So far, I haven't had to just like abandon the hole and, you know, scoot over an inch, which would be really ugly. So I've been really fortunate so far not to hit them square on. Here I am measuring for the beam. So how I do this is I take the measurements and then I write it on the wood close by. And then I'll even sometimes put like arrows, you know, to kind of show which direction I'm measuring from, to and from, around the beam, because you got to measure the below the beam, the measurement on each side of the beam. And so I write all that up on the wood with arrows, and then I can kind of come back and reference it and kind of double check and make sure it's all right. So that works really good for me. And then you just cover it up with that piece when you go on. Well, we're almost done with this side. These pieces have been taking a lot longer to put on them than we expected, or we really didn't know what to expect, really. The roof went really fast. You know, we had all the metal on in like 2 days. But these side pieces are taking about a day for 4 or 5 pieces. So 4 or 5 pieces a day, which is, that's a lot. But there's a lot of detail work that we had to do. There's beams that we got to go around on every side of the house, and then all the windows and doors. It's just a slow process. But the nice thing is, once we get these up, you know, we're done. We don't have to do any painting. We should never have to paint them. Last for years and years, so it's a totally maintenance-free, you know, exterior. And like I say, once we get them up, we're done. In our next video, we hope to finish up the front side of the house. It has all that detail with all the windows and vents, and we've been kind of dreading it, but we're hoping to power through and get it done, and then we'll be finished with the exterior. We're also going to give you a cost breakdown for the metalwork, the roof, and the siding that we're doing here.
Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and join us again next time.